thing we've learned so far during the course of this climate voice bootcamp. Like, I want to see our reaction in the chat box. Let's use this as our icebreaker. Okay, thank you, Jacob. So what is that one thing you've learned so far during the course of this? Okay. Adam said, COTSO protocol and national adaptation plan. Thank you for that. We are more than we are about 18 participants. I'm expecting all of us to contribute to this. And I know we've learned one or two things so far from these sessions. All right, all right. I'm still expecting a response. Our blessing said, okay. Someone said, I learned the role of financing in climate action and how it can make a significant impact. That's a great one. Thank you for that. Ma, have you been able to send it, ma? The live link? All right, ma. So just give me a few minutes while I open the link. So, but for that, I'd like you to meet our facilitator. Her name is Nasreen. She's the founder of Surge African. I'm trying to. So she's the founder of Surge Africa. Nasreen is a seasoned environmental sustainability practitioner with extensive experience spanning the climate development policy and communication sectors. She collaborates with both local and international institutions to design tailored programs and interventions specifically engineered to address the complex and evolving development needs across the African continent. Our approach integrates high-level strategy with grounded, actionable solutions to ensure a long-term resilience and impact. So as the founder of Surge Africa, Nasreen led an organization operating at the vital intersection of policy, media, and resilience within Nigeria and the wider African region. Our work is deeply rooted in diplomacy and strategic media, where she develops initiatives aimed at bridging critical data and advocacy gaps. These efforts are particularly focused on the interconnected pillars of energy security, finance, and climate adaptation, ensuring that African perspectives are accurately represented in global discourses. Furthermore, Nasreen possesses significant expertise in climate philanthropy. She works closely with international funding organizations to lead and refine operations across African and the broader global South, ensuring that capital is deployed effectively to support sustainable growth. So we are leveraging our deep understanding of the regional dynamics and global policy framework She continues to play a transformative role in advancing climate justice and thrive in face of environmental challenges. So that's our facilitator, that's our bio. So I'd like to share her screen before she proceeds now. You can have the floor while I go on and try and share your screen.
Hi everyone, good morning. Can you hear me? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Good, great. I don't think I should further introduce myself, but in the interest of identification, you can call me Nas going forward. I'm very excited to be here. So I wanted to sort of do a little bit of icebreaker as we move on. Um, I thought we could start by asking people to type, two things. First, one of what if you could just let us know your sort of favorite food meal, and then if you could also just really type your least favorite or something that you would only eat if that's the only thing available and you're hungry. So do we want to type that? We're gonna dedicate a minute to this and then we move on to business. So it's just a way of us getting to know each other.
So can you all see my screen?
Ah, people, plantain and beans, Christopher. Maybe we should get you some this afternoon. Jacob, how can you like any draw soup? There are different kind of draw soup. You should be very specific. Can we get more of this? And then we'll proceed. Rice and beans. Actually, I'm also the kind of person that I don't like any food that doesn't have meat. So yes, I guess we're the same on that. So blessing, when yam is not in season, what do you do? All right, guys, we're a bit tight on time, so and it's going to be a very interactive discussion, and let's jump right into it. So I was asked to deliver this session, which I thought was sort of a very interesting opportunity to sort of speak to young people coming up in the sector, but also to dive into some of the most important uh, frameworks that we have in Nigeria and at the broader level, but also ones that are going through some really deep structural challenges. So, but before we dive into it, because with me, when I'm running sessions, I prefer to assume that we're having a just informal conversation with each other as opposed to one speaking to the others. So, feel free to add comments. I don't like scenarios where you only say things at the end. I would really like to see lots of feedback, reflections, comments just popping in the chat as I speak. What do you think about it? How does that make you feel? What experiences does it bring up for you? So we're going to have a very interactive discussion around that. So, but before we dive into it, I thought it would be interesting for this if we look at a couple of questions for this particular session. I imagine that it would be great to start with unpacking the roots and origin of where and how NDCs came to be. So before we move on to deep conversation about it, do you want to move to the next slide, please?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm going to throw this out to everyone on this call, and you can use the chat box to respond. The first question we have here is, where were the NDCs formalized? All you need to do is just name a single location or event. No need to just one single location or event. And then when were the NDCs formalized? NDCs being the nationally determined contribution. So you also need to name a single year or time period. And that says yes, it's actually year. So if we can have those two responses in the chat, and then we keep things moving. Thank you. Do we have, yeah, I see a few. We need more. Are you sure it was in Paris? Was it really in 2025, 2015? Are we sure it wasn't in Morocco? Which cup, Mukhtar Adamu? I can see you saying at the cup, but which cup? Can we have more input on this? Because this actually sets the pace for our discussion. Is there anybody that would like to contribute with the same points or other new inputs? Hmm. All right. So yes, based on popular opinion, to respond to the first segment, yes, where were the NDCs formalized? They were formalized in Paris. When were the NDCs first introduced? They were introduced in 2015. So I suppose we are all correct. Uh, Next slide, please. And thank you all for your contribution. Uh, yeah. So, I thought it would be great for us to warm into this topic by looking at the timeline of how the NDCs came to be, building our knowledge and understanding of why this process is very integral, not only to climate governance, but to sustainable development and international cooperation. And I wanted to use this segment to show that the NDCs emerged from global climate negotiations and debates around equity, responsibility, and climate justice. So, what are the nationally determined contributions? The NDCs, in essence, are national climate action plans submitted by countries under the Paris Agreement. And what they do is that they outline how each country intends to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapt to climate impacts, and contribute to global climate goals while reflecting national circumstances and development priorities. Because I think that we cannot go on signing decrees and international agreements without having them reflect local realities. So here on our screen, I've highlighted four key timelines that I believe defines how the NDCs came to be and its status so far. The first is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. It was created in 1992 at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro. And government adopted the UNFCCC alongside the UNCCD and UNCBD as the primary, but then, UNFCCC became the primary international treaty on climate change. Uh, what what essentially does this mean and what did it do? So the convention introduced the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And what this did was it recognized that countries have different historical responsibilities and therefore they also have different capacities to address climate change. This principle later became central to climate justice debates and also led to the design of the NDCs. The second most important timeline is between the 1997 to 2012, where the limitations of the Kyoto Protocol led developing nations to kick off new debates regarding emission and historic responsibilities. So some notable points were that the Kyoto Protocol imposed legally binding emission reduction targets mainly to developed countries. Major emitters either did not participate fully or withdraw, creating tensions over fairness and effectiveness, while developing countries argued that industrialized nations should carry greater responsibilities because of their historic emission. And these challenges led negotiators to seek a more flexible system where all countries would participate. So this is actually what prompted the third most important timeline, and now one of the most defining moments in the climate sector, the Paris Agreement, which introduces the NDCs in 2015. At COP21 in 2015, 195 countries adopted the Paris Agreement. And instead of imposing top-down targets, countries were asked to submit their own climate pledges. And these pledges were actually initially called intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs. Once countries ratified the Paris Agreement, then this became NDCs. And well, what did this did was that it marked a major shift toward nationally owned climate commitment while also maintaining a collective goal of limiting warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts toward 1.5 degrees Celsius. So now the fourth and final period is between 2020 to 2025, which we term the ambition cycle. And this was also when NDC 3.0 was effected. So what happened within this period is that the Paris Agreement established a 5-year cycle requiring countries to submit progressively stronger NDCs. Updated NDCs were also due in 2020, with the next round due in 2025, often referred to as NDCs 3.0. I think that Nigeria has also revised theirs and they've submitted it, if I'm not mistaken. So the first global stocktake also concluded at COP28 and showed that current commitment remain insufficient to keep us well below the 1.5 degree reach. And also, what NDC 3.0 did was there was this expectation that this new revision would contain stronger mitigation targets, adaptation measures, financing plan, and also new just transition commitment. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight here before we move forward was that despite these progressive measures, the revision, many of these international engagement negotiations, tension remains at the heart of debates around Nigeria's NDC 3.0, particularly regarding climate finance, adaptation funding, loss and damage, energy transition pathways, and also equitable development, some of which we have the opportunity to actually dive into today. So, do we want to move on to the next slide? Yeah. So I just want to jump in to say that if you do have any comments, feedback, drop it in the chat. And then, after this slide, we're going to have a brief discussion. I'm going to allow people to come in and reflect, and then we move on. So while the NDCs present a tangible roadmap for addressing climate challenges and even streamlining decarbonization goals, political and governance gaps still exist that may hinder progress. And these structural challenges are mapped through 6 key lenses that you can see on your screen. The first is dependence on conditional climate finance. So one of the things that is very, very apparent in our political and governance system is how dependent we are when it comes to international financing. So many of a significant proportion of Nigeria's NDC's commitment are conditional upon receiving international financial support. So there is really serious climate justice concerns arising because Nigeria contributes a relatively small share of historic global emission, yet we face severe climate impact. There are also issues around delays, unpredictability, and inadequacy of international climate finance that can undermine implementation. So what this does is that it raises questions of fairness, particularly regarding the responsibility of high-emitting countries to support mitigation and adaptation efforts in developing nations. So one of these low-hanging fruit that we're going to discuss later is who should bear the cost of climate action when those suffering the most contributed least to the problem. So I'm going to take this question and bring it back to you guys during the discussion. So the next key point is energy transition risks for fossil fuel dependent communities. The reality of things in Nigeria is that our economy remains significantly dependent on oil and gas revenues, and NDC implementation may require accelerated decarbonization of energy sector reforms while seeing the energy transition plan trying to address it. And without adequate safeguards, workers, youth, and communities who are dependent on fossil fuel value change could experience economic dislocation and job losses. So one of the key arguments that we see coming up or that have been coming up in the climate sector, especially in progressive economies, I mean, Nigeria is a petro state, but we definitely do not have progressive economies, for instance, compared to India, compared to South Africa. And one of the key arguments that you see even advocates make in these economies, in this society, is that, well, we want to decarbonize, we want to go green, we want to adapt to clean and renewable energy. However, we also need to look at how do we safeguard the working class? How do we transfer skill? How do we ensure that communities who are heavily dependent on this fossil fuel value chain are not left to bear the brunt? I don't think this is an argument that we make strongly in Nigeria, but I also do believe that, especially when we look at regions like the Niger Delta, where the situation we've had in the past 2 years is major oil giants like Shell have actually divested. And when they divest fully from Nigerian market after about 60 years of operation, however, what they left in their wake is not development, not riches, serious level of pollution of land, pollution of water, and different kinds of human rights violations and abuses. So when you look at the scenario in the Niger Delta, it raises serious concerns around accountability when it comes to decarbonization, especially in the fossil industries and from mega oil corporations who can actually come into your markets, come into your societies, uh, operates over decades of destructive extractivism and actually leave so much waste on their wake without any sense of responsibility or accountability. I know that there are movements like We the People in the Niger Delta who actually took Shell to call, who are currently demanding accountability that you cannot divest after 60 years of polluting the land without any tangible plan for reparation. What they're saying is that there is no divestment without reparation. So they need the land to be restored. So these are common arguments that we are actually seeing from fossil fuel dependent economies when it comes to decarbonization. Uh, so when you look at the energy transition risks for fossil dependent economy, for me, one key question that also come up is how can Nigeria pursue decarbonization without creating new forms of inequality and unemployment? So this is also a question that we are going to discuss about at the end of this particular discussion. So the third is a limited participation of vulnerable groups in decision making. I think that I had this conversation earlier. I mean, I've been constantly having this conversation over the past few months regarding inclusion of people who matter when it comes to policy development, policy statement, and also implementation of regulations. So climate policies generally and all other policies when it comes to governance are often developed through highly technical and decentralized process. I'm here sitting comfortably in my home, but I feel like I'm an expert who can give my opinion on issues around Niger Delta. I've been there a couple of times, but I do not think that, you know, I think I have the capacity, but the way that I think, I largely feel like I do not have the right to make decisions for these people because I'm not from there. I'm not the person living their experiences. I'm not also the person grappling with the consequences of what's happening there. So I do think that for the most part, women, youth, indigenous peoples, pastoralists, fisher folks, and persons with disability, and also our frontline communities frequently have limited influence over policy design and implementation, whether it's the NDCs or otherwise. And I do think that these are things that we as practitioners need to deeply look into. Because what this does is actually it results in climate actions that do not reflect local priorities and realities. I often make this joke about photographers and creatives who come from Benin, Lagos, and they come to the north for a day, and somebody wants to write a documentary about people from the north. And I often feel like for me, it's so perfunctory because you're not from here. You don't understand the culture, you don't understand the society. How can you come from an entirely different region, different perspective, visit a place for a day or two and think that you know a people enough to do a documentary about them. So it's actually the same thing when you apply it to policy and other things. So now what is the low-hanging fruit questions when it comes to this? I think one of the things that we would look at discussing is who gets to decide what climate action looks like and whose voices are excluded. So these are questions that another question that we are going to touch base on after this segment. So the fourth part is, of course, around weak adaptation financing despite high climate vulnerability. Of course, we know that Nigeria faces increasing drought, flood, desertification, coastal erosion, and food security. However, climate investment often prioritize mitigation projects that attract private investments such as renewable energy projects over community-based adaptation initiatives. And, we know that the result of this is that vulnerable populations in rural and climate-exposed regions may therefore not receive adequate support. We see this a lot as practitioners in the space. You work with communities and the funding just never trickled down to where it should be. And so one of the questions around weak adaptation finance would center on are climate investment reaching the people most affected by climate impact. So this is also a question that we are going to discuss afterwards. So the fifth is around governance, transparency, and accountability gaps. My opinion is that effective NDC implementation requires reports monitoring, reporting, and accountability system and issues around fragmented institutional coordination and limited public access to climate finance and implementation data can actually reduce transparency. And I'm saying this because at Search currently we're currently developing this climate finance tracker. And we actually thought we would be done by now, but it's been extremely difficult to gather the data to put things together because of how fragmented the data and the information is. We're working with different government offices across a couple of regions, but it's been extremely difficult. Sometimes even the climate officers actually are not aware of what came to the state and for what it was used for. So I think that one of the key things we actually need to maximize on is transparency and accountability. Nigeria receives a lot of funding when it comes to climate finance. Not that it's enough, but it does receive a considerable amount. So it's a matter of what is this finance being used for. If we are going to complain that the amount that we receive is merely not enough, then we also need to be able to explain where the funding went to, what it was used for, and potentially what is the result of the implementations of some of this intervention. So another question then that we are going to explore is around how can communities hold governments and international partners accountable for climate commitments? So the last but not the least when it comes to this issue is unequal regional and social impacts of climate change. Obviously, Nigeria is an extremely diverse country. We have 6 geopolitical zones, and I always joke that I always joke that each region is extremely distinct in terms of people, culture, but also in terms of geography and landscape. It's sometimes I find it extremely crazy where even in the Northeast, you move from extreme sand dunes, desert encroachment, and you go, the next thing you are driving into highlands, mountains, and heavily forested areas. So Nigeria is extremely diverse. We have different sort of weathers and landscape. Therefore, climate impacts are not distributed evenly across Nigeria based on this landscape, based on social structure, based on economic situation, and also based on population. In northern Nigeria, the regions are popularly known for facing increasing desertification, water levels are going low, and also resource-related conflicts. While in some parts of the south, there are issues around coastal and riverine communities facing flooding, erosion, and sea level rise. However, there are serious issues consistently across these regions on poor households, that are increasing. Women, youth, and informal workers have fewer resources to adapt and recover from climate shocks when this happen. Therefore, one of the key questions I would like us to sort of examine when it comes to issues around unequal regional and social impacts is how can NDC implementation prioritize those facing the greatest climate risks and least adaptive capacity? So, these are some of the 6 key vulnerabilities when it comes to implementation of NDCs in Nigeria. I do not think that they encompass the whole of societal issues, but I do think that they sort of highlight some of the key issues that we see and face today. And I welcome, us to have a very short discussion around this. So how we're going to go with the discussion is let me see if I can have a question. Can you give me a second if I can to see if I can share something on my screen?
Okay.
So I'm trying to see if I can share a question on my screen, but I'm really terrible with tech. So I always say this to my team. I'm like the worst person when it comes to tech. So we're not going to do that because I don't want to end up confusing myself. But guys, what we can do is I'm going to send this question in the chat. I sent the question in the chat and then we have a discussion about it. So the first is who should bear the cost of climate action when those suffering the most contributed least to the problem? So this question specifically is reflecting the first point on dependence on conditional climate finance. I did mention earlier on that we're very dependent on conditional climate finance. So now that we know we're dependent on conditional climate finance and there are lots of issues around this, who should bear the cost of climate action when those who are suffering the most contributed the least? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask maybe 1 or 2 people to volunteer to, are we able to unmute them so that we can have 1 or 2 feedback from this? And then we move on to the second question.
Yes, they can try to raise up their hands and we can
All
try to
right.
tell them to.
Thank you. So does anybody who wants to come into, yeah, we have Joanna.
Jacob, you can have the floor. If you can hear me. Jacob.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and
Oh,
clear.
oh. Thank you so much, Nas, for that wonderful presentation on the climate framework and how they were formed across time up to this very moment. So, concerning the questions you raise, yeah, it's a bit tricky, but looking at it, most industrialized nations are the one contributing to a lot of the climate change and a lot of these issues surrounding climate change. And we are bearing the brunt of that, seeing that we contribute less to it. So to me, I think they should, as a matter of fact, bear the cost. Even though it may be we suffering from it, we also have to contribute part to the solution. We can't just fold our arms and then what if they don't do anything? Because we are the ones suffering from it. So the uh, looking at it, contributing, trying to see a kind of solution to it is the nations, those countries with more of the problems should contribute sort of like 70, 30% at that rate. It will really help because we cannot just fold our arms and then say they should do it. You know, people have respond, countries respond differently to things, especially they have a control strategy around it that doesn't affect them, you know. So I think that's my own submission on the issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacob, for your very articulative feedback. I actually agree with your point. And we speak about this in terms of climate space, right? And at a country to country level or at a regional level in terms of us, we're the global south, and them, that the global north, they're more advanced, they are the historic emitters and all that. But actually, when you also put this at a societal level, you find that it's usually the same. Even at the community level, we often expect people who have more financial capacity to come in and support if there is a natural disaster, if there are issues within community. We usually feel like, well, we can contribute as locals, but we also expect people with bigger bandwidth to contribute more. And so I mean, this goes across board in different nations. The feeling is the same, the demand is the same, that historic emitters, countries who have benefited and built their economies based on extractivism, based on cheap labor from the global south, based on colonization and historic environmental injustice, should be able to pay for the transition. I mean, I deeply agree with what you said. So, second question, which I have added to the chat, is how can Nigeria pursue decarbonization without creating new forms of inequality and unemployment? And this question came with my second point around energy transition risks for fossil fuel dependent economy, where I explained that it's great to decarbonize, but we also need to look at technology transfer. We need to look at jobs that would be lost. We need to look at how do we build our skill to sort of quickly adapt to sort of the gaps, to the needs for the renewable sector. So how can Nigeria pursue decarbonization without creating new forms of inequality and unemployment? Is there anybody who wants to come in and respond to this? Guys, we have minus Yetunde and I. We do have 29 other amazing folks. If I don't see a hand raised, I would start name calling. And if I name you, you must unmute. So you know, does anybody wants to volunteer to sort of say a couple of things or type in the chat? But I think coming would make it more interactive. Blessing, you don't want to come and say something. Aminu, you've been active now, you don't want to say anything. I'm seeing Benedict, Bernard, all of you guys. Esther, Joseph. We have some really, amazing people here. Oluwaseun, you don't want to come and say anything. All right, so in the absence of any feedback or if any idea comes on, you can just drop it in the chat. However, how can Nigeria pursue decarbonization without creating new forms of inequality and unemployment? I think that for me, one of the key things that Nigeria needs to do is we do have a massive fossil industry, but it's also a failed industry. It's also a non-functional industry. Nonetheless, we have people employed there. We have people whose livelihoods depend on that. So I look at it in two ways: the industrial part where people get employed, and then the community part where there's been historic extraction that has become a serious detriment to communities, that have led to forced displacement, that has disoriented communities and led to conflict. So first, when it comes to the industry, I think that the government needs to create a very holistic, cohesive framework of transition that looks at upskilling workers. In this, at the same vein, the government needs to heavily invest in industrializing the renewable energy sector as quickly as possible. We don't need to start from the scratch. We can partner with advanced economies like China, India, Russia, Norway. They've done it. We've seen it. They're doing it. Most of their economies run on renewables now. We can learn from that. There are different ways we can raise funds, uh, investments for resources, different ways we can raise funds internally without having to go into debt or loan with IMF or World Bank or the like. So I think that the government needs to look at doing that from the industrial side, upskilling, ensuring that people are ready to transition into the new system, and also partnering international corporations with advanced economy, learn from them, and then adapt it to our own local scenarios. So on the community side, I do believe that there should be justice, there should be reparations, the pollution should be cleaned up, and people should be paid for historic violations of human rights that they have suffered. So these are some of the things that I think countries and Nigeria can actually do to reduce the injustice that might come with decarbonization. More holistically, I think that I would say that we have some incredible policies addressing many of these issues. I just really think that we need to ensure that our policies are well implemented. They should be regulated in the same language, the same energy that they are being pushed forward and they're being adopted. Usually it's in the implementation that there is a huge gap, and I think that our government can do better in addressing this gap. Back to the chart, I can see that Luca says something around Nigeria can pursue decarbonization while avoiding new inequalities by adopting a just transition approach, one that protects workers, create new economies, opportunities, and ensure vulnerable communities are not left behind. I agree. We definitely need to support small business and informal workers. I think that, Esther, you have a strong point on informal workers. Our industry, I was having this conversation with some colleagues. Whatever industry you think of in Nigeria actually runs and is operated by informal workers. The informality, I think we actually launched a study last month or 2 months ago about the informal energy sector in Nigeria and how it's actually the informal energy sector in Nigeria that powers Nigeria, not whatever uh, government system we have going on. So I would invite everybody to read that. It was a great analysis that we did. We spent months on the study. So yes, definitely there needs to be focus on informal workers, especially those that work on circularity and the likes. Uh, we need to first create green jobs and make it possible for people to also transition. We need to prop up the industry. We need to elevate our industry. We need to upskill, and then by propping up the industry, that means that the industry exists. we upskill people, that means the people have the capacity, and then jobs will boom naturally. Thanks for that, Ibu. And then Chunedi is saying the country should expand solar, mini grid, and clean energy access, especially in underserved communities, while encouraging local manufacturing of renewable energy. I think that Nasini over the past 2 years have done an incredible job in just developing and incubating new ideas, new talents. I think they are one agency in Nigeria that have been working with international governments and industry to see that we developed our own local equipment. They're doing that very well. It hasn't scaled, but they are trying to do that. Uh, the last bit is I just realized that I was reading old points from before, but Samuel also said that Nigeria can pursue decarbonization without increasing inequality or unemployment if the transition is fully planned around people, not emission. And Samuel, I just have to absolutely agree because at the end of the day, emission is not even an issue for us. And I think for me, whenever I speak about decarbonization, I usually think of transition, not necessarily emission, because when it comes to emission, we don't even emit that much to be so worried about it, so to say. So we have about 6 questions, but I'm worried about time, so I'm going to jump and bring down the question, the last question. Maybe if we have time, we can come back. So the last bit is I want to raise this. How can communities hold government and international partners accountable for climate commitments? So this is actually in response to governance, transparency, and accountability gaps. So I wonder if people have ideas on how communities can hold governments and international partners accountable for climate commitments. Does anybody have an idea around this to share? Or if you want to comment on the chat, we can dedicate a minute to this and then we move on to the next slide. Hi, Ibu. Yes, the floor is yours. Yetunde, can we unmute him?
Economics himself and have the floor.
Okay, it's actually a she. Good morning, everybody. Um, I think that the only way communities can actually hold government accountable is if they know that there are things like that in place. Through my work interacting with many communities, I realized that they actually do not even know that these policies exist, that they actually have rights to these things. So it actually starts from creating awareness because you cannot begin to fight for what you do not know. So for me, the first step will be to let communities understand what they really are fighting for and what rights they have, and to believe in their own ability, that their own actions can actually create change. Thank you.
Hi, Ifu. I just want to say that that was so powerful because for me, I always felt like information is power, and information in itself could also be an armor. It's like a whole bunch of things because when you have information, then you are left with the challenge of whether to act or not to act. It's you have it in your court to decide what to do. You will not be manipulated. And definitely, if you do get subjugated, it's because you've kept quiet. So I agree with this point. And also, when you rounded up saying that people can only sort of respond, think of engaging when they actually know and understand. So I think that was really a powerful blessing. Do you still have your hand up? Do you want to come in? Do you want to unmute yourself, Blessing, and have the floor?
Thank you for this opportunity. I think the first speaker has raised the points I wanted to say because those communities most of them don't even know that those policies exist. And the first step I think we are going to take is to create awareness. Most people that is majorly affected are those that are in the villages, are in the communities. They don't even know. And sometimes once they come with all those policies, they don't even read it to them for them to understand. So we actually have this to create awareness, give them the information, interpret it to them, even if it is in their local languages, so that they can understand what all those policies are. Because if they don't understand those policies, there is no how they will know what is inside. So it is our duty now to do a campaign, create awareness, and teach them that such things exist and how it can benefit them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input, Bless, and I wholeheartedly agree. We have a comment in the chat from Pelume that says advocacy and grassroots mobilization, people asking questions and demanding transparency, active participation because it actually concerns us. And Mfoma said, I believe every community should have a focal person in charge of monitoring and evaluation as well as report back to relevant authorities, else the misuse of funds will keep happening. I fully agree. Well, it seems like this is a very popular question, so I'm going to allow Bernard to come in. Bernard, please keep it short. After you, Esther, and then on Onyedikachi. I hope
That's
I
fine.
said it
That's
right.
fine.
So can we have it in this order? Bernard, Esther, and Onye. Please, yeah, 1 minute because we need to move on, but I'm loving this engagement, so I think we should allow
Okay,
people.
thank you. I think for me, the most important thing there is for the community to follow each and every step. I mean, the the government or the international community too must make the process very accessible to the public, where the communities too must be able to monitor each and every step from budgets and outcomes, things like that. So at least there should be transparency where the communities will actively monitor not just the being beneficiary, but also check those data, what has been done, what has not been done, how much has been done, something like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Esther, do you want to jump in?
Okay. Yeah, I actually want to comment on financial accountability that it is very crucial because they need to track the financial means, where the money is going, because climate commitments mean little without accountability. So communities must be empowered to ask the tough questions. Where is the money going? How is it spent? Who benefited? So there needs to be transparency in it.
Thank you for that, Esther. Actually, I agree that it needs to be transparent because if it is indeed transparent, then people will be able to access data more easily and people will be able to know where the funding is, where the work is being done. So yeah, thank you for that. Hi, Onya, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I believe that we said it all on making sure that communities are aware of the knowing that they have every right to know whatever policy that is going on around them on this climate action. So I believe as they are also aware of this, they can also make these partners and the international community accountable. They can hold them accountable through turning those promises into measurable commitment where communities can be able to track this thing down using the SMART approach, where they know that, these promises of we are going to do this, the NDC 3.0, how we're going to make sure that these things come to us, what are the government doing, what are these international organizations doing. So if they can be able to draft it down in database and spreadsheet and then monitor through the SMART approach, I think it will go a long way in holding them accountable for every promise and every policy being implemented. Thank you.
Hi, Prosper. I actually agree with your point, and I think that we definitely need to demand accountability in that manner. Hi, Tunde, and I just want to say thank you guys so much for being very active. I know that Q&A is usually reserved at the end of the session, but I like to keep folks engaged. So I hope that so far it's not been too distracting, and I hope that the points are being passed across. Yetunde, can we have the next slide on a governance framework? Thank
Sure.
you.
Fine. All right. All right. Now you see my screen.
It's loading yet, but at least from my end.
How about now?
Yeah, it's loading. It has loaded. So just give me a second, please. So again, thank you guys for that very robust engagement. So what we're going to look at now is 6 key vulnerabilities when it comes to implementation of NDCs in Nigeria. We've done this, so we're going to move on to the next one, which is the governance framework. Do you want to move to the next slide? Yeah. So, specifically on this, I just want to start by saying that there are many governance frameworks surrounding Nigeria and how it implements many of its policies. However, specifically on NDCs, a few notable ones are first, the Federal Ministry of Environment, which I would say serves more or less as a lead coordinating authority. And the role of the Ministry of Environment is that it serves as Nigeria's focal ministry for climate policy and international climate negotiations under the UNFCCC. It also leads NDC development, revision, implementation, oversight, and reporting. One of the things that it also does is that it coordinates national climate strategies, adaptation plans, and emission reporting, and also houses key climate change department and technical units. One of the key example I would give is that in 2023 at Surge Africa, we brought together seven regional representatives of the 7 states in Northwest for the Northwest Commissioner Summit, and then we ended up launching this Northwest Declaration on Climate and Environment, and we're currently in the process of ratifying that, and we've been working alongside the Federal Ministry for that. When we wanted to do the climate finance tracker, we had to reach out to them because they have offices all over the country and they have specific climate decks. So we needed to reach out to them if we wanted to get accurate data. So these are some of the things that the Federal Ministry does. So some of the coordination challenges they have is around limited authority to compel action across powerful sectoral ministries, because there are ministries that don't necessarily take orders from the Federal Ministry or have their own independent funding, and so they don't need to coordinate with the Federal Ministry. There's serious resource and capacity constraints affecting monitoring and implementation. Climate change is often treated as an environmental issue rather than a whole of government development priority, which I think should drastically change. And there's also difficulty in tracking implementation across multiple sectors. And I can tell you, we're currently experiencing that the data is simply not available. So the second entity is the National Council on Climate Change, popularly known as the NCCC, and the National Council on Climate Change Secretariat. So these are almost one entity. Their institutional role is that they were established through the Climate Change Act 2021 to provide high-level climate governance for the country. They're responsible for coordinating Nigeria's transition to low carbon, climate resilient economy, and they also oversee implementation of climate commitments, including the NDCs. The National Council advises the President and promotes inter-ministerial coordination. It also supports carbon budgeting and national climate accountability mechanisms. Some of the coordination challenges they have is around potential overlap of mandates with existing ministries, especially the Federal Ministry of Environment, because they were actually initially under them and then they had to branch out. There are also institutional roles that continue to evolve. Sometimes this evolvement creates occasional uncertainty regarding leadership accountability. They also have very limited integration of subnational actors and non-state actors when it comes to decision-making processes. So at least from this, we think that there is a need for stronger mechanisms to ensure that ministries align development plans with NDC objective. So we also have sectoral ministries, departments, and agencies, depending on which one you're looking at. Some of the key ministries that implement NDCs within their sectors are Federal Ministry of Power, because they look at renewable energy and energy transition, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, usually focus on climate smart agriculture and land use action. You have the Federal Ministry of Water and Resources, looking at water resilience and adaptation, Ministry of Transportation, focused on low carbon transport, Federal Ministry of Budget, looking at economic planning, and other energy-related agencies do exist. So the issues generally when it comes to these things are sectoral priorities often compete with climate objectives, and ministries more operate in silos, resulting in fragmented implementation. There are also issues around inconsistent climate mainstreaming across sectors. And one key thing that I think I've mentioned about 3 to 4, 5 now is weak data availability, weak data sharing, systems that can hinder NDC monitoring and reporting. So the last bit here is around state governments and non-state actors. So state governments implement many adaptation and resilience measures on ground, while civil society, youth groups, indigenous communities, academia, and the private sector usually support implementation and accountability. So states are critical for sectors such as agriculture, forestry, water management, and disaster risk reduction. Because many of these things are increasingly important for localizing NDC targets and climate action. So some of the challenges we see when we look at states and civil society is significant variation in institutional capacity among states, weak vertical coordination between federal and state government. Many of our policy work is targeted across states and subnational. We never do federal level policies. And I can attest that there is a serious misalignment and weak coordination when it comes to federal and state governments, especially as regards to how policy should be implemented. So there is limited access to climate finance and technical support at subnational levels, very true. And communities usually, communities' participation in climate decision making remains uneven. So for the most part, we see consultants, technical experts coming in to be commissioned to develop policies without any input of locals. We just assume that this is what the people need, something that we've touched base before. So I think these are coordination challenges that needs to be addressed. So again, the last bit here is the cross-cutting coordination challenges affecting NDC's implementation. And I noted that across all institutions, there are 4 recurring governance challenges. The first is fragmented institutional mandates leading to duplication and gaps. I think that many of us are aware of that. Mandates are seriously fragmented. They're everywhere. So much duplications, because people don't want to work together. NGOs see whatever NGOs do and they're like, I want to do something like that. Why don't you just coordinate, facilitate, partner, and work together? No, but you want to have your own credit, you want to do your own thing. So many of these things, because civil society organizations approach governments differently at different intervals, but with the same idea, with the same goal. So there is bound to be duplication. And of course, weak coordination between federal, state, and local government levels, and especially at the local government levels. What I have noticed is that the local government does not coordinate with the state also doesn't. The state doesn't coordinate with its regional allies. and the regional allies or at the state level, they don't coordinate with the federal government. The only time they coordinate is if money is coming in, and once money has been divided, everybody takes it, and that's just it. And this creates a serious governance gap and also hinder development cooperation at the regional and state level. I mean, we've seen that a lot in terms of forest management, in terms of trying to pass law across regions. The third is insufficient climate finance tracking and accountability systems. We simply do not have that. It's difficult to even build such systems. The fourth is limited inclusion of frontline communities, women, and youth in decision-making processes. I think this is something that we're very well aware of. Decisions are made without inclusion of anyone except the experts in the room, and we expect these interventions to work. They will not. So I think that these are some challenges that will continuously affect NDCs unless they are being addressed, and some critical climate justice perspective that we need to take into account or that we need to see being changed is that the government needs to enable meaningful participation by affected community. We need to ensure equitable distribution of climate finance. There needs to be a strengthened level of accountability mechanisms, and we all need to support a just transition for vulnerable population and workers. So these are some of the, again, ministries that are tasked with this, and some of their responsibilities and some of the issues that they face. Do we want to move to the next slide? So this next slide largely looks at legal and policy instruments that support NDC implementation. And I thought I would highlight 6. There are a lot of tens of legal and policy instruments. But these are some of the ones that came to mind. The first is the Climate Change Act. Its relevance to NDC implementation is that it's Nigeria's first comprehensive climate legislation, and it also establishes a legal framework for achieving low carbon and climate resilience development, and it also provides the strongest legal basis for implementing both conditional and unconditional commitments. There is the National Climate Change Policy that is supposed to kick off between 2021 to 2030. So it serves as Nigeria's overarching climate policy framework. It also aligns national development objective with climate mitigation adaptation priorities and guides the integration of national NDC commitment into its planning processes. So the third, we have the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan. This plan provides a roadmap toward net zero emission by 2060. It also identifies investment requirements and financing gap. It supports emission reduction while pursuing economic development and energy access. So there is a very strong intersection with NDC implementation there. The fourth is National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy. This promotes renewable energy deployment and energy efficiency. It supports expansion of solar, wind, hydro, and biomass, and also contribute directly to emission reduction in energy sector. Fifth, we have the National Adaptation Plan Framework. In terms of its relevance to NDC, it guides adaptation planning in vulnerable sector. It addresses agriculture, water resources, health infrastructure, and ecosystem, and it also supports resilience building among climate vulnerable communities. And the last bit is strengthen the adaptation components of Nigeria's NDC. So the last is National Forest Policy and REDD+. I'm not a big fan of this, or not a fan of it at all, but it is a policy nonetheless. So it supports emission reduction through forest conservation, restoration, and sustainable land management. I would agree that that is not what it does, but well, that's what I would argue that's not what it says, but that's what the policy says. It also addresses deforestation and land use, significant sources of emission, and enhances carbon sequestration. So I added this here because I actually wanted to draw our attention to some of the things about policy. First, regarding this REDD+ and National Forest Policy specifically, I wanted to just really let everybody know that some policies are actually great, while some are extremely bad for us as a people. And I don't think the REDD+ and the National Forest Policy strategy is actually a great one for Nigeria. It definitely supports emission reduction, but it supports emission reduction by displacement of forest communities. Actually, about 5 years ago, a civil society organization did a study, a robust study, about 2 year study on the Red Plus in Cross River, in the forest there in Cross River, and what it found out was that the Red Plus, the carbon markets, whatever they have going on there, ending up displacing the local population there in the forest, leading to a migration, people that have used that ecosystem, forced displacement. So people that have used that ecosystem for millennia are now being forced. Because of that, it also led to actually greater levels of deforestation than the forest initially had. It also led to illegal activities. So for the most part, while policies are great, while some of these instruments support implementation of some policies that we want to see actualized, we also need to be very careful in terms of the instruments themselves, in terms of the articles or the terms of some of these policies, because quite a huge number of these policies are not even proposed by the Nigerian government. They are proposed by foreign governments who have interest in our systems, who have interest in controlling some of these things. So again, I know that Nigeria put out, is it Nigeria or Kenya? But I feel like it's Nigeria. I want to believe it is. They put out this carbon markets framework, trading framework, if I'm not mistaken. And well, because I'm not a fan of that, I haven't paid so much attention. But for people who are interested, I am sure you will find lots of discrepancies. You also find out that many advanced economies don't have this, they don't need it. Just as we do not need it, we don't need to offset our emission. We definitely do not need to accept money from other people that would lead to mass displacement, that would lead to greater levels of deforestation just because we need the money. So yes, these are some of the policies that guide the implementation of the NDCs, but the caveat here is that not every policy is a great policy and it's for the integration of the people. So do we want to move to the next slide? I would actually like reflections on this in the chat before we move on to our discussion. Hi, Yetunde, can we move to the next slide on emission inventory challenges? So what are some of the emission inventory challenges related to NDCs? The first is data availability and quality gaps. We've touched base on this, but one of the key challenges we have is that many sectors lack comprehensive, up-to-date, and reliable emission data. Data collection systems are often fragmented across ministries, agencies, and private sectors, and significant gaps exist in sectors such as agriculture, waste management, land use, and informal sector. So what are the implications? Well, if you don't have data, it makes it difficult to establish accurate baselines and emission trajectories. It creates uncertainties when assessing progress towards NDCs, and it also weakens confidence in national reporting to UNFCCC. The second is weak measurement, reporting, and verification systems. So Nigeria's climate data are still evolving and are not yet fully institutionalized across all sectors, leading to limited harmonization of methodology, reporting techniques, and data sharing protocols. Monitoring responsibilities are often spread across multiple institutions with varying capacities that most of the times we cannot verify. And the implications for NDCs in this regard is challenges tracking implementation outcomes and emission. It makes it difficult to demonstrate results to international climate finance producers, and this can actually hinder transparency and accountability under Paris Agreement's enhanced transparency framework. So the third is limited technical and institutional capacity. We have insufficient numbers of trained emissions inventory expert modelers and data analysis. Because of this, there is a serious dependence on external consultant and donor-supported technical assistance for inventory preparation. And this lack of capacity actually constrains at state and local government level. So we cannot get data from state or local government level because we don't have the experts or expertise to do that. And the resulting factor of this for NDC's implementation is that it delays inventory updates and reporting cycles. It limits Nigeria's ability to independently assess mitigation impacts, and it also reduces institutional continuity and knowledge retention. So the fourth is around challenges in land use, forestry, and oil and gas emission accounting. There is a serious level of difficulty when obtaining accurate data on deforestation, forest degradation, land use change, and carbon sequestration. There's also persistent uncertainty around emission from gas flaring, methane leaks, and other fugitive emission in the oil and gas sector. So because of this, there is limited integration of satellite monitoring, remote sensing, and ground truthing systems. We don't have that. So implications for this can lead to underestimation or overestimation of national emission. And I think we're actually grappling with two. In some cases, we underestimate. In many cases, we overestimate. But because of the popular narrative around energy emission reduction, we usually overestimate what we need to actually reduce when it comes to emission. It affects credibility of mitigation actions in two of Nigeria's most important emission sectors, which is forestry and oil and gas. It also complicates efforts to access climate finance linked to emission reduction and carbon markets, of course, because we don't have the data to verify all of the claims that we would want to make when seeking funding. So why does this matter for NDC's 3.0? So from an NDC implementation perspective, this challenge is not simply reducing emission, but accurately measuring reduction. So if we're reducing emission, we need to be able to say that we are, and we need to define how. So as Nigeria moves toward NDC 3.0, stronger emission inventories will be essential for tracking progress towards the 20% unconditional and 47% conditional targets Nigeria has set. Second, accessing international climate finance, we definitely need to be able to measure that for us to be able to access greater finance. Participating in carbon markets, if Nigeria wants to do that again, I'm not a huge fan of this. Building transparency and accountability, and also ensuring that climate actions are evidence-based and equitable. So from a climate justice perspective, and as we round up this session, what I would say is that from a climate justice lens, weak emissions inventories can obscure who is responsible for emission, as we've seen over the past few decades, with all the arguments between the global north and the global south. Mitigation investment should be mitigation investment should be redirected. We could argue that it's currently not being directed where it should be because we don't have the data to make the arguments that this is the sector that needs it the most. And whether vulnerable communities are benefiting from climate action, again, we can look broadly and say that communities are being affected. But are we measuring it? We're not. Can we also measure whether or not they're benefiting from any kind of intervention? It's also very difficult to, right? So strengthening monitoring and verification systems supports not only technical compliance, but also transparency and accountability and equitable climate governance. So at the end of this session, what I would like to say is that, for the most part, we have some really great policies. We also have a very serious issue at hand with the climate crisis, not, undoubtedly so. But we also need to be able to make our arguments with data backed by facts and lived experiences. I think that we're very good with the lived experiences part. We know what experiences people are living with. However, we don't really have credible, tangible data to back up our argument. We're frustrated, we're angry, we're demanding accountability, but we simply do not have data to back up facts. That doesn't mean that whatever we're demanding for is unreasonable or whatever we're claiming is untrue. It is extremely true. We are living through this every day. Our communities in the front line are living through this every day, but we do need data. I know that for the most part, we rely on government, but as civil society organization, we also can and must do more when it comes to this. So I'm going to open the floor for a bit of open discussion around this. And please do know that I'm also going to share a live document that everybody is going to sort of contribute to. It's a bit of mapping to complement this session. But I'm gonna open the floor for 2 comments, 1 or 2 reflective comments, and then we move to the mapping because we're a bit tight on time, and then we come back and we close.
Sorry,
Yes,
please can I come in?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, with the mapping, we have another session by 12 p.m. Maybe they can do that one as their take home, and I don't know if that is okay with you.
No, it's very okay, but we still have 6 minutes,
All right.
and it's a live document. So while other people are commenting, others can actually go into. I'm gonna share the link. But they can. I also think it's something that they can also do after this. But I'm gonna share the link now. Uh, so yeah, does anybody wants to come in to make a bit of reflection? Um, do we have any reflection on this? So there
Drop
is
the link for us.
Hi Atunde, you can also share your screen with the live mapping, but yeah, we do have it.
All right. Can you see my slide?
So since we're a bit tight on time, I would like to say that everybody have access to this, and it's something that you can populate after this session, not necessarily now. So the idea is for us to do a bit of policy analysis around what is working and what is not working. For each tile we have, you can add 2 points. So they are two slides of all this. So what is working, you have the tiles. What is not working, you add it. You can add 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, as much as you want. I'm gonna also duplicate this slide in case there are more contributions. So the same with what should the government do differently? So the segment of what should the government do differently, I thought we would appreciate an explanation if you have some points. So we're creating a broader space for people to just really go into to explain what should the government do this differently. So yes, as Yetunde has said, you can either start populating now or do it later, but this forms part of the session anyways. I'm gonna give back the floor to you, Yetunde, in case there are people who want to uh, reflect on some of the points raised. I just want to say it's been a pleasure speaking to you all. Truly appreciate all of the feedback that came from everybody, Ibu, Esther, Jacob, Luca, every one of you. So it's been, very pleasing to engage with Blessing, Bernard, and everyone else. So back to you, Yetunde.
All right. Thank you, Nasreen, for the wonderful and impactful session. So I'd like every one of us to appreciate our facilitator this morning for the powerful session and by responding with our favorite emojis. Thank you. We appreciate you for the time and dedication you put into this session. Thank you once again. All right, please. Is there any question? We'd like to take at least, let's say, one question before we end this call and move to the announcement for the next session. So we don't have much time, and Any question or reflection? Should I take our silence as no? All right. Thank you. In the absence of no question, we appreciate Nasreen for the session. So for the next session, the interactive activity she shared with us, that will be a part of our take home for this week. Part of our interactive activity for this week that we're going to embark on, and you're going to share it with us via email as well. So for the next session, it's coming up by 12 noon. So I implore every one of us to be present as well for the second session. It's going to be a powerful one at that too. So, and the attendance list will be shared as well for the second session. So I think this brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much. Nasreen, do you have anything to say?
No, I think it was a pleasant program. I was looking forward to the mapping because I felt it would be very interactive. But yeah, looking forward to the input afterwards. So thank you guys for having me.
That means that I can share you with I can assist you with the mail like that for the interactive activity so that you can have a view of it as well. Is that okay?
And that's very okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma. So I'm expecting us for the next session. Do have a wonderful break.